grant at VTEC. So I will turn it over to Carrie.
Okay, good morning. Today we're gathered to examine the realities of identity, resilience, and historical injustices as they relate to Virginia's Native communities. Our goal is to educate you about the profound and lasting effects of the Virginia Racial Integrity Act of 1924 and the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. This discussion underscores the ongoing need for awareness and advocacy. I'm very honored today to be sitting up here with Chief Stephen Adkins of the Chickahominy Indian Tribe, Dr. Ashley Spivey of the Pamunkey Tribe, and Chief Ann Richardson of the Rappahannock Indian Tribe. I was told to go over a few housekeeping rules. Make sure you silence all cell phones and any other mobile devices. Please give everyone your undivided attention and save side conversations for lunch. Panelists, the panelists, please be respectful of each other's time. Each panelist will have.
You ain't look at me.
I know a couple of them pretty well, so. Each panelist will have 5 minutes to answer each question. Keep your answers crisp and concise. Save the long backstory for lunch. Panelists will have 2 minutes each to add feedback to a question asked of their peers. Please be additive. If you agree, say so if you must, and move on to a new point. And generate light and not heat. Let's have a healthy conversation. And that was all written down for me to say, so. All right, I'm gonna start with Chief Richardson. I really enjoyed listening to your speech a little while ago, so I think this question will go right along with what you were saying. Despite the hardships imposed by these laws, the Virginia Racial Integrity Law and the Indian Citizenship Act, what do you believe has been the key to the Rappahannock people's resilience and continuity over the years within Virginia?
So when we talk about leadership strategies and leadership making decisions, our tribe came together at a very critical time period when we couldn't get jobs, we couldn't get education, and decided which families were going to be removed from our community to go north so that they could get jobs, that they could get education for their children, and they could send money back to the tribe here to pay for attorneys and lobbyists. Let's see. Do you know how it goes on?
This is a contraption.
Oh, that little thing up there. Okay.
It's good acoustic.
Dr. Spivey.
You use this one?
Testing.
Oh, okay, so this one works. I'm a little texted. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I didn't know that it wasn't on. Those decisions was a strategy developed by our leadership to help our tribe survive. And so the money that came back, we were able to hire our own lobbyists and lawyers to fight for us here in Richmond in the General Assembly for our identity, and also to reach out to other Indian organizations at the time that were fighting for tribes. And so that was one of the strategies that our community used in order to survive.
Chief, do you have anything to add to her?
You told our story. No, that's good.
Dr. Spivey?
To add, well,
It's okay to say that.
I could say a lot. Wait, is mine working?
Here,
Oh, goodness gracious. Okay.
I'll look at you that way.
Yeah, I think
I think we'll wait for the next, because you gave me the big overarching questions, and I only have 2 minutes, so I'll save my breath.
All right, well, while you have the mic.
It is fun.
How do you think the legacy of these acts is reflected in the current social-political climate for Native people in Virginia? What lessons can we learn from this history as we move forward?
Okay. See, and I only have 2 minutes to answer that question.
We have 5 minutes.
Oh, I have 5 minutes? Okay. All right. So that's a big question. And I think there's a lot of different avenues we could take in answering that. And I just, I always put a disclaimer out that this is, my perspective and my opinion. I don't represent the entire Virginia Indian community. I'm only providing one perspective on that. But with my experience as being a member of the Pamunkey Indian tribe, and I have a degree in anthropology and archaeology that is focused in the history of our tribal communities. So this is my perspective, okay? Just want to be clear about that. I think that one of the legacies that, let's say, 1924 and the U.S. Citizenship Act has had, again, I want to preface and follow Chief Ann's earlier words that this was a lead up, right, to centuries of what our communities were facing regarding especially the way that we were legally classified, right? And I could go into that very deeply, but what to take away from that is that we were not given the opportunity to define that for ourselves, at least from a legal standpoint. And so here we are in survival mode, always having to kind of pivot, right, and adapt to a way that outsiders were trying to perceive us and define us without actually understanding how we defined and understood ourselves. And so that was a part of a long legacy. We are still, I think, grappling with that issue in terms of how outsiders perceive us. We've had to contend with, because of especially the Racial Integrity Act, with this outside system based in white supremacy that was trying to say who's indigenous, who's not, who's white, who's not, who's a member of whatever community and who's not. And so we have had this burden on us to have to prove who we are. And as I mentioned, we're still dealing with that today. One of the biggest legacies that I think the Racial Integrity Act has had and contributed to is this myth that Indigenous people do not exist in the state of Virginia, right? And we've been shouldered with that burden to prove that that is not the truth. And one thing that I think we can learn from the future, and this is no judgment on our ancestors because they did what they had to do to survive. But what I think we can learn is that we don't have to contend with outsider perceptions about how we are supposed to look, how we are supposed to act, how we are supposed to be, right? We have the right, and I think we are in the position to be able to define that for ourselves and not to worry or care about what outsiders are saying about us, right? And I think but that's not an easy task. I know we have a lot of healing to do within our communities regarding how we define what's Indian, what's Pamunkey, what's Rappahannock. And I think we need to work together to be able to do that. And that's going to look different for each individual, I think for each community. But I'm going to quote Raven Adams over here. We are Indigenous enough. Clap for Raven. And I think the fight that our ancestors were, have been engaged in, like Chief Ann said, since 1607, and definitely in 1924, actually, our ancestors, our family members worked together. Yeah. Your grandparents, my great-great-grandfather, your family, all worked together over 100 years ago to fight that fight. And here are their descendants today having this conversation to talk about their legacy. And I promised I wasn't going to cry, and I'm not going to cry.
May I?
Yes. George Major Cook was chief of the Pamunkey Indian tribe from 1902 until his death in 1930. And, our family kind of history points to the fact that he died in 1930 from a heart attack, which he did. But a lot of that was due to the stress of the fight that he took on for Pamunkey and alongside other tribal communities in the state of Virginia. And he didn't get to see the impact of his legacy. He didn't get to see the folks that followed in his footsteps and have carried on the torch. And I am hoping that I'm one of those individuals following in his footsteps, aside many other people who are on the stage and who I see out in the audience. But we can learn from that. We have the hindsight of 2024 to see what our ancestors did that was beneficial and what our ancestors did that maybe has negatively impacted our communities, right? And we can see those mistakes. We can see the positive that came out of that, and we can learn from that. And I think the biggest thing to take away is that we take the torch for ourselves and define who we are moving forward. And we don't worry about what the outside world has to say about our indigeneity and what that means to us.
Chief Ann or Chief Stevie, when you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I'm good. She did a great job.
I'd like to just echo some of the sentiments, some of the observations from Dr. Ashley Adkins Spivey. and it's true. These tribes have been inextricably intertwined for well over 100 years. Back in the mid 1800s, Frank Speck and George Mooney came and lived with these tribes and others of the Southern federally recognized tribes. And he reported back to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and his conclusion was that these tribes are direct descendants of those communities that were here in 1607 and before. They're direct descendants of their namesake communities. And if you look at Walter Ashby Plecker, he caught wind of this, and he saw that we were moving and shaking. He saw that our trajectory was moving forward, upward and forward, and that we were going to claim our rightful place in history. We weren't waiting for somebody to tell us who we were. So he began to work feverishly on that Racial Integrity Act so he could stop these, as he dubbed them, mongrels, from insinuating themselves into the larger community. So this was when Jim Crow was at its highest. And we had white communities courting us to separate us from the black communities. They wanted us to align with them and join in that voting bloc. But Jim Crow took care of that because the poll tax successfully eliminated, and the test you took successfully eliminated a lot of black and brown people from being part of that calculus. But make no mistake about it, Walter Ashby Plecker could see what is going on. So he wanted headwinds to slow us down. He knew there was conversation on the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. He said, we've got to nip this in the bud. We're going to take care of this problem of Indians and of other people of color. So you saw eugenics. You saw all of these things that scholars should have turned their back on, but guess what? They were part of that process. They also embraced eugenics, and they embraced this Racial Integrity Act, so no one stood up for us. The colleges and universities, the three branches of government, executive, judicial, legislative, all of them endorsed what Walter Plecker did. So we can reach out to him and call him all kinds of names, but at the end of the day, the machine, the political machinery in the Commonwealth of Virginia strongly endorsed what he did. So what did they do when they should have been standing up for us? They went to Williamsburg and founded the Anglo-Saxon Club, which was a Ku Klux Klan on steroids.
So I want to continue with that. This question goes along with it. With what you were saying. The Indian Citizenship Act of 1924 granted Native people U.S. citizenship, yet it didn't resolve the deeper issues of identity and recognition. How have Native people in Virginia navigated the complexities of being both Native and American over the last century?
So I did some serious thought on this last night. I called Kerry around 10 o'clock and said, what am I supposed to talk about? And he said, you got a list of questions from the esteemed Raven Adams. 3 weeks ago. So I grabbed the questions and started looking. But
So see, Raymond, that's just a Chickahominy trait.
yeah. But anyway, I stole a passage from a book penned by Ned Blackhawk. And I pose this question: how can a nation founded on the homelands of dispossessed indigenous people be the world's most exemplary democracy? In my view, they cannot be, but that's what it looks like. And then I looked at the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924, which granted Native people U.S. citizenship, and as Kerry said, didn't resolve the deep issues of identity and recognition. So part of the calculus in putting that Indian Citizenship Act in play, it was another device to steal land from Native people, because they were thinking the Native people would get their land fee simple so they could further that cause that was exhibited in the manifest doctrine of discovery, that these Western land-hungry European savages could come over and take our land with impunity. And they began that process, but they didn't have enough. So here's another mechanism. We give them citizenship, they get their land fee simple. So why do they need the land that has been allocated to them? You know, the fact that they had 90% of the land mass just wasn't enough. They wanted the other 2%. I think back to what Ashley mentioned earlier, that we have to continue to define who we are. I've been at a gathering. I was at this Lewis and Clark event back in 2006, and be aware, you may have very high opinions of Thomas Jefferson. I'm not one of those, because when he sent out Lewis and Clark, their sole objective was to steal more land from indigenous peoples. But I was there, and this lady saw me from afar, and I told my wife, I said, she'll come over, count to 5. She'll be here. And she'll say, "You're Indian, aren't you?" And I'll say, "Yes." And she'll say, "Where are you from?" And I'll say, "Virginia." And she'll say, "I didn't know there were Indians in Virginia." And, you know, I said, "I came from a place about 90 minutes from here." And that's where we've been forever, which is another testimony to the very skillful, artfully designed textbooks that don't tell our story. But our story is going to be told, because you have people like this and young people coming up. I saw Haley earlier, who are going to tell that story. And we're going to tell it despite an unreceptive audience, the main one being the State Department of Education, who doesn't have the will to tell our story in the textbooks. So here's an excerpt from a Native scholars and law professionals from tribal nations who gathered recently at Northwestern Pritzker School of Law. 100 years back, 100 years forward: sovereignty, community, indigenous values. In June 1924, the United States Congress passed the Indian Citizen Act, which gave citizenship to all Native Americans born in the U.S. Since then, several laws have been implemented in an effort to grant rights for indigenous tribes, including the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934, which Walter Ashby Plecker successfully excluded us from that. He was called and asked, "Are the Indians of Virginia?" He was called at the behest of the BIA, who had the story that Frank Speck and George Mooney shared with them. And he gave a very prompt no, which slammed the door in our face. But at any rate, that law was enacted to decrease the U.S. government's control of Native people's affairs so they may become a self-sufficient governed people. And now I quote Megan Bang: "We hope that people will recognize that Indian law is American law. Indian law is American law. And there's no law or policy making that should be happening that does not consider indigenous peoples. The lack of engagement with Native peoples presently is a systemic bias that harms our communities." And this conference occurred February 2024. We hope that everyone takes up their civic responsibility to insist on Native presence, engagement with Native communities and nations, and supports Native leadership, not just for Native people, but all people. Now, this has become very apparent in this Code Commission where Virginia tribes are working with the legislature to further define this code, the codes that apply to localities, towns, and municipalities. Whenever you see something that applies to them, it also must apply to federally recognized tribes. They must understand this government-to-government relationship, and I'm telling you, folks, it's an uphill climb. The questions I ask reflect the dearth of knowledge, the preponderance of ignorance that exists in state and federal legislatures regarding the constitutionally guaranteed government-to-government relationship that sovereign nations have. So we're going to need your help educating those people. One prime example of lack of knowledge, Dr. Spivey made a great presentation at Jamestown Yorktown Foundation regarding NAGPRA. And people ask, well, why doesn't that apply to African American graves? And Dr. Spivey responded very succinctly, we have a government-to-government relationship with the United States. And part of that trust relationship is they no longer can desecrate our graves, protected sites with impunity. We do not want to see Indian skulls on eBay for sale. We don't want to see the likes of Valentine Museum here in Richmond unearthing Monacan remains and putting them in a display case for all people to see. So we're fighting that, folks. We're fighting cultural racism. We have been operating, and it's time for me to go. But anyway, here we go.
I want to say something about it. I just want to follow up on some of the things that Chief Adkins was talking about regarding the U.S. Citizenship Act, too, that I think a lot of folks don't know. As you know, he was discussing citizenship, a path towards citizenship for Indigenous peoples in America was an assimilationist policy. Exactly. A lot of folks don't understand that. And you're probably going to hear me say the word whiplash a lot because I feel like that's what our folks have been facing for a long time. And what I mean by that, and specifically in this context, right, there's a couple of scenarios. The same year that the United States was granting citizenship, right, to the Indigenous population, which is maybe an unofficial recognition, hey, we've got Indigenous folks here, right, and in the United States, the state of Virginia was denying the existence, right, of Indigenous people, especially from that legal classification standpoint. At the same time, not even a decade before 1924, we had folks fighting for the state of Virginia to recognize our status as non-citizens, okay? And that was because it forced the Commonwealth to basically state, okay, yes, we have non-citizen Indians in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And what we mean by that, right? You know, not before 1924, Indigenous people were not citizens of the United States. They had a path through, as Chief Atkins mentioned, owning land, the Dawes Act. If you had land in fee simple through an allotment, you could become a citizen. There were other paths to citizenship. If you moved outside of your Indigenous community, your tribal community with its self-governance, and went outside of that to live a life separate from it, you would be granted citizenship, right? So it was an assimilationist policy. And that's why, especially Pamunkey and Mattaponi folks who had reservation lands in 1924 fought the World War I draft because you can't draft us. We are not citizens. The Commonwealth said, no, you're citizens. You're not, you're not non-citizen Indians. We don't have those in the state of Virginia. Well, they fought that all the way up to the federal government. And the federal government decreed, these are non-citizen Indians, and you have to recognize them as such. And then in less than a decade, well, now we have citizenship. Where do we stand now? So I'm trying to get at the whiplash effect of what these policies were doing to our people and to our leaders, and again, forcing us to pivot and to adapt in ways that were very unfair, I think, to our folks. And just to also piggyback on that, I mean, yes, we were granted citizenship, Native people weren't engaged in that discussion. And it was not something that was universally accepted within Indian country because of the fear that it would, as an assimilationist tactic, destroy tribal governments, because now we have all of this, we have United States citizens. But what it created was a dual, basically, citizenship for Indigenous people, right? We have a nested citizenship in the United States. And that we have a unique status in the United States because of that, because we are citizens of our own nations, but also citizens of the United States. And rules around that citizenship shift depending on are you on tribal lands or are you off tribal lands, which has also created a lot of complexity around jurisdiction. And that's a whole nother conversation for another day. But I just wanted to give some historical antecedents to kind of show what our people were dealing with when it came to you're this, you're that, you're not this. So what are we, right? So I'll stop talking now. Okay.
I think this has been great conversation. So I'm excited about it. I would like to say one thing on a personal note. My maternal great-grandfather was one of the ones who was drafted during World War I. And when he got to the camp, they asked him what his nationality was, and he told them American Indian. Well, he was married with a few young children at home. He was given the option, according to my grandmother, he was given the option of staying in the Army or going back home. He went back home. He wasn't a citizen of the United States. He went back home. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, so for a lot of the things that they're talking about, it really is personal for so many of us that are here.
Carrie, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'd like to just give another scenario to that whole time period that you're talking about. So because we were not reservated, we were considered citizen Indians in the Rappahannock community, and our men were drafted and ended up taking the Army to court because they wanted to draft them. They didn't want to draft them as Native Americans, and they refused to serve if they couldn't serve as Native Americans. And so they actually went to jail and served a prison sentence because they refused to serve as anything but Native American. So that's another scenario of that same time period, how tribes were dealing with that.
Carrie, if you'd indulge me, I'd like to cite my great uncle, who's the grandfather of the first assistant chief of the Chickahominy tribe, but Graham Adkins, served in World War I. He was he had just an entrepreneurial spirit, and at that time he owned some of the most modern implements of farming one could possess, and people in the county had sought him to actually cultivate their lands, and because they didn't have the equipment. He bought a new car in 1926 and tells a story of driving to DC and people lined up for miles. They'd hear the car and they'd want to see it. But where I'm going with this, he served in World War I. And when he left the service, he was asked to write a narrative, write a little paragraph on what it meant. And I'll summarize it. I can't give it full justice. If I did, I'd be in tears. But he said it was a privilege and an honor to serve, to protect the land, Mother Earth, that it sustained he and his family for generations. He said, I did that, and I was proud to do it. I can't answer your question that I'm proud to have served as an American citizen because I don't have citizenship. But he proudly served, protecting this land and protecting what you folks call America. So people fought valiantly, and when they came home, they again were returned to second-class citizenship. But you never put that on him because he claimed who he was and dared anyone to contradict him. So that's the spirit that our ancestors had. That's the spirit that people like Haley are going to carry on to the next generation.
I love y'all's answers because they're flowing right with these questions. Chief Ann, as the leader of the Rappahannock tribe, can you share how the Racial Integrity Act has impacted your tribe over the past century and how these effects have shaped the identity and unity of the Rappahannock people?
So that's a very interesting question, Carrie, because we're grappling with some of that right now. So our people went to prison. We divided our community to be able to survive. And so many of the strategies that were utilized at that time have had adverse effects on our community today. And we are grappling with the strategies to heal those things for our people. And so the people that went away, they would do like we would do in our own community. They went into states like New Jersey, and they created their own community in New Jersey. And then some went to New York, and they did the same thing, Baltimore, and they did the same thing where many other tribes were coming into those same cities to seek jobs in the same way. And so they intermarried with people from those areas. They also would go into like Jewish communities and Italian communities and Greek communities. And so we have, Rappahannock Jews and Rappahannock Italians in our northern populations. And now these people are, some of them when, I guess it was back about 20 years ago when we first started setting up our archives and developing our petition for federal recognition, we were sending out notices to all of the different families. And these people came back, and some of them thought they were Italian, and they were both on both sides Rappahannock. They had no idea they were Native or what tribe they came from. And so today, they totally support the work that they're doing, but their mother was involved in the 1924 fight. And so, even as an elder on a fixed income, she was sending money to Vital to help fight the fight. And we had many of the people who were elders that were sending money into Vital to help fight that fight. And that just speaks to the resiliency that we talked about and the strategies, because the dreams and the aspirations and the sacrifices of those people from that generation, they were continuing to fight that fight because they knew how important it was for our people. Now to be able to integrate their children and grandchildren back into the tribe and teaching them about the culture and teaching them about the traditions is another story altogether. And as Ashley was saying in her remarks about redefining who we are as tribal people that have Jewish backgrounds and Italian backgrounds and African American backgrounds and Caucasian American backgrounds, to pull out and restore to them the things that were important to their ancestors, the things that their ancestors worked so hard for, it is really important for us. And yet, for the people who stayed, the people who sacrificed, the people who went away to boarding schools to get an education, it's a difficult healing. It's a difficult being able to come back and integrate those people back into the community. And so I've just recently had a conversation with the Jimmy Carter Peace Center about ways to reintegrate these people back into the community. And the gentleman who was president said, it's similar to a refugee community. And I thought, I go to Israel often and have been involved in and educated about how Israel is bringing back the different refugees from their diaspora. And now we're having to do the same thing. And so it's been difficult, but we're working on that. And we want to reintegrate people back into their inheritance that they have in the tribe. We don't want them to lose that. And then the next generations that are coming up that don't know anything about the tribe at all, to be able to educate them and reintegrate them back into their culture and into their tribes. So it's quite a job. As I said in Sovereignty Conference, I so admire these leaders because nobody really knows the weight of the responsibility on their shoulders. Because all of these things that we've talked about, and we'll talk about that later, I guess, intergenerational trauma, the trauma of carrying the weight of the generations on your shoulders is where we are today as leaders. The responsibility of not losing those people that were meant to be in our community, of losing those people who are descendants of those who made that sacrifice. We have stories at Christmas time of how those communities in the cities would get together and wail and cry because they missed their family and their home so bad. What was that trauma like for them and for their families? What was it like for us? You know, I want to do an exhibit about the missing chairs and the missing people in our community that were no longer there. For the fight that we have sustained all of these generations later. It's traumatic in so many different ways.
That sounds like something we need to talk about for the longer film, because I love that the missing share, because we talk about that a lot with the elders who never saw, the ones who fought so hard, like you said, that gave money for us to gain federal recognition. And here we are living what they fought for. So,
And just to add, how I got that was from my trip to Israel and Poland to see, there's a giant display in Poland of what it was like in the ghettos for the Jewish people and how they were put on trains, and all of the people, they had doctors and lawyers and all of the people that were in the ghetto together trying to survive. And yet those people who were put on the trains and removed from the community and taken to the gas chambers, they have a display of the missing chairs in that plaza. And I thought, oh my God, this so resonates with what we've experienced in Virginia.
very powerful. Chief Steve, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think you need to give Dr. Spivey and myself 5 minutes on this one. This is too rich to abandon. But and I'm glad you mentioned generational trauma because we feel it, we see it. But just some antecedents to where we are today and how we got here. Our friends at Pamunkey reached out to us in the 1880s and said, guys, you better get it together in Chickahominy. You need to have a place of worship where you all meet, and that connection to your heritage will really blossom and grow in that setting. So in 1901, the Chickahominy tribe formed Samaria Baptist Church. And we did it, the clerk of the circuit court of Charles City gave us a piece of property, and another, and these were white folks, another member of the community gave us property to add to it. So we ended up having 6/10 of an acre in what's now Samaria Indian Baptist Church. But prior to that, the Chickahominy people were meeting at Samaria Baptist Church, which was a white church, but there were 53 Chickahominy citizens in that church. And the white church disbanded it, and they gave us permission to meet in that building until we could erect our own. So we kept the name and built that structure, occupied it, I think, in 1907. But creating that Samaria Indian Baptist Church provided a place for our local diaspora to come together on a regular basis. That's not to say that we didn't talk and meet when folks were going to different churches and we didn't have our own church. But that church became the hub of our community. So the Samaria Indian Baptist Church was organized in 1901. At the same time, the Chickahominy Indian tribe reorganized. We used to be led by a council of 8 people, I believe it was, called the Pamunkey. And among that group, there would be a spokesperson named by that group. And the Chickahominy tribe were kind of like the Jewish nations of old. They said, other people have chiefs. We want a chief too. So we started, the Jewish folks wanted a king versus a judge. So we started a process and we elect a chief every 4 years, and we don't worry about an electoral college. We think every vote counts. Wish America thought that, but that's another story. So we did, and out of that, we had tribal meetings every quarter. And those records, if you had a chance to pore over them, some of the language gets a little colorful, but I remember a quote from my grandfather, who was chief. He said, you have schools for blacks, you have schools for whites. We need schools for Indians. We need schools for our people. And so the tribes built their own schools and hired their own teachers. But that spoke to who we are and our determination to move ahead. So this didn't go unnoticed by Walter Plecker. He said, look at these guys. And he actually sent some folks down to our church to spy on us, to check on our Indianness. And he compared us to the George Catlin Indians. I don't think Catlin ever painted a picture of my folks, but hey, it doesn't bother me. But neither did he define what I should look like and who I am. So that from that, we had records when the federal recognition criteria were changed to have that base roll go back to 1900. We were there. We had the Mooney list from 1899. And when we went for our last technical review with the Office of Federal Acknowledgement, which was then headed by Lee Fleming, he said, Chief Adkins, I told you the Chickahominy tribe could get federal recognition administratively. He said, here's the package. And for those who don't know, Nikki Bass is now the director of the Office of Federal Acknowledgement within the Bureau of Indian Affairs. But at that meeting, I saw the same lady providing technical assistance who was with us at Chickahominy tribe back in the 90s. And she said, Chief, if you don't get federal acknowledgement through the administratively, don't feel bad. Look at all you're learning. I said, ma'am, we didn't get in the race for consolation prize. I'm in it to win it. And the Chickahominy tribe expended over $1 million in administrative process. So don't be fooled when people tell you that they are tribes who leapfrog the administrative route. All of us had petitions in some degree of completion. Some may have been as close as Chickahominy. But what I told the folks that day is whichever one hits first is the one we'll take. And January 29th, 2018, the Public Law 115-121 was signed into law, which gave us federal recognition legislatively. It was supported by 435 members of the House and 100 senators. Ken Adams, the pickup truck I wanted, Ken, I think we spent out of our pockets going back and forth to DC. But the point I'm making is a generational trauma that we felt propelled us to go after that goal, and we weren't settling for second place. If you know of anyone who enters a race to come in second, let me know, and I'll send them to my therapist. But anyway, and my therapist, by the way, is my wife. But I wanted you to hear that part and to know that the deterrents that are put ahead of us by the Commonwealth of Virginia didn't preclude us seeking higher education. Some went to Oklahoma, some went to, and we even had people to go to Haskell Indian School. But we were determined to fulfill not only our dreams, but our parents' dreams. I will never forget when I graduated from VCU, I wasn't interested in going up to get my diploma. And Dad said, son, will you do it for me? So I did. And when I descended the stage and saw the tears streaming down my dad's face, it made it all worthwhile to me. And that's what we're doing with our folks today. We're trying to encourage them to seek higher education. And it doesn't have to be the academic track. The Chickahominy tribe is working now to establish a VTEC center where we'll offer electronics, we'll offer computer classes, we'll offer welding, plumbing, and HVAC, because we want people to find themselves in the marketplace with an edge where they can be competitive. So the generational trauma that we endured has made us stronger. And you have 4 people on this stage who will never give up. We'll never stop fighting the fight, because it's what God created us to be. He didn't ask me, Steve Adkins, do you want to be born a Chickahominy Indian? And I probably would have said, no, make me blonde-haired and blue-eyed, because I want to be on the top of the food chain. But I'm here, and we're fighting. And you have 4 people on this stage who will never give up.
I would like to add, just to put into a little bit of perspective, the Samaria school that Chief was talking about, Reggie and I started school at that school. So it wasn't that long ago. We were actually in Charles City County. They didn't have to fully integrate until I was going to the 5th grade. So people think it's ancient history. It's not. It's ancient. Yeah, I feel it. Definitely feel it. But listen, people just don't understand. I also went to college in Oklahoma along with Chief. I went because I heard so much about back home in Northeastern State all my life, and I was like, well, I'm gonna go. And it was really interesting going, because like Chief was talking about, being born in Chickahominy. I had people asking, you're a Chick or what? It's so many tribes in the United States, 574 federally recognized tribes. So, like I said, we're still here. Now, Dr. Spivey, I wanted to give you a chance to answer that, because we are running out of time. So I don't want to send so many people in their lunch. But along with what we've discussed, from your professional perspective, how have the Racial Integrity Act and the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924 influenced the cultural identity and social structure of Native communities here in Virginia?
Well, it's a perfect question, because it's related to what I wanted to bring up following the conversation with both chiefs. There are many, I think, impacts, right? Just some themes that have already been covered today, right, include marriage practices, northern migration, right? This impacted all of our communities. It impacted families, where some families did become separated along racial lines because, again, this was seen in some people's minds as a mechanism of survival. And I'll talk more about how I feel like that is still impacting our communities today, alongside what Chief Ann was saying. But one thing I want to highlight, where I believe this is a positive impact, and again, it's not just the 1924 Racial Integrity Act, it was the lead up to that, right? It was the lead up to, wait, brown folks, we all are getting way too much power. You're moving up that food chain, and we have to stop that. So during the rise of Jim Crow, right, and eugenics, which is also based in scientific racism, like all of these things are connected. They're not mutually exclusive. And there were decades, if not centuries, leading up to what happened in 1924. And our families, the leaders in our communities, saw the writing on the wall, right? And I truly believe that in many ways, the tribes in Virginia chose to reestablish their governments at the times that they did, because it was another mechanism to solidify our communities, to fight the fight that was coming, right? And so I'm putting a positive silver lining spin on the atrocities that were happening to communities of color during this time. It pushed us to reestablish those political governments and force the Commonwealth, right, in many ways, to reestablish that government-to-government relationship. And look where we are today because of that. We wouldn't be talking about state recognition and federal recognition and the journey. Now it's a hard journey. I'm not trying to, discount that. But if we didn't have that push, we wouldn't be, I think, in the positions that we're in today, which is we have a lot to face moving forward with federal acknowledgement. It's a whole nother extra burden, I believe, in terms of navigating that world in a way that we can to best serve our citizens, right? But again, without that push, I don't think that we would be in the position that we're here today. And so that's one impact, a positive impact that speaks to resiliency that I do want to highlight. I think, and again, different communities and different tribal members faced this time period in different ways, right? And I think in some ways, too, one of the other positive aspects that I look to, again, leading up to 24, was this movement to be very public, I think, about our reorganizing, putting forth our connections to Virginia history. For example, there was a traveling performing group, intertribal, at a time they were called the Pamunkey Players, but it was intertribal, that went around the state, literally performing the history of our people in Virginia and its relationship to Virginia. That's not a mistake. Yes, it was an economic endeavor, but I truly believe that it was a way to put forth for folks a tangible, visual, right, reminder that you have Indigenous people in the state of Virginia, and look what we're doing. I think it again pushed some communities to take the traditions that we might have had in our families to become more public about it, right? Which in turn helped those traditions be carried on. So I'm finding the silver linings. I feel like there are definitely aspects of our cultural identity that have been negatively impacted because of the fracturing of our community due to migration and the separation of families. But we also have to talk about that resilient side of how it has impacted our cultural identity, I think, in positive ways as well. And one thing I do want to bring home, I have a lot of issues with the way that especially academics and non-Indigenous people have talked about racial integrity and its impacts on our folks. It always seems to be framed in that, well, they lost their identity. We didn't know. Just because we couldn't put Indian on a piece of paper did not mean that we lost who we are in any way, shape, or form. We just, again, pivoted and adapted to different ways of expressing that identity, whether that was at the kitchen table with our families or intergenerational family members, or through powwow, or through making and selling our traditional arts, right? That never went away. So if there's any academics in the audience, just know, or journalists especially, God bless, they need some help in how to write about Indians. And actually, Drew Almond, where are you? I don't know if he's in here. I think it's an Upper Mattaponi family member of some folks in this room that has written a book on that. So anyways, but I feel like, again, it's back to us reclaiming our place at the front and at the top, and defining who we are and what that means to us. And I'm becoming very frustrated of having to, I feel like constantly, and I know you guys are definitely dealing with this much more, having to put out the fire of how our histories and our cultures are misrepresented. It happens on a daily basis. And you know what? I'm going to be honest, academic institutions are one of the worst culprits. Virginia, get it together. Sorry. But you want to talk to me?
Just one thing.
Yes, sir.
Carrie, indulge me one thing. If you folks are satisfied with the status quo, and status quo, folks, really isn't. You're either moving ahead or moving back. So let's discount that term, status quo. But if you're satisfied with the product you're getting from the Virginia Department of Education, you may be in the wrong place. What I'm challenging you to do is go to the polls at every election, check out the candidates, and find out if they want to tell Virginia's story, because Virginia's story includes Black and brown people. We need to get rid of that Eurocentric whitewash that has occurred in these textbooks. So if you want to see the real story taught, demand it. I'm running out of time. I'll be 80 next year, and I yearn to see the classroom textbooks reflect history. I'm not talking about writing a new history. I'm saying take the resources that are there and teach Virginia history. You cannot teach it without teaching about the contributions and the plights and the stuff that went on in the Black and brown community. When you do it, you give short shrift to Virginia's story, America's story, and to our story. So if you want the complete history taught, demand it. You really have to demand it. And for the state legislature, for the House, it's every 2 years. For the Senate, it's every 4 years. So get to know the candidates and demand what you want, because the legislative branch can make it happen. They have much more power than they probably think they do, but they can make it happen. So we've got to stop being satisfied to be taught the drivel that they give us. We want facts, and facts are there. And you have 4 people on the stage who can help educate you on the facts. Does anyone know when the first treaty between the colonists and indigenous people in this area was signed?
I do.
There you go. 1614.
Chickahominy and the English people.
Do you think that's worthy of note? Do you think it's worthy of knowing that a scant 3.5 years after the settlers landed, Lord Delaware at Jamestown ordered the annihilation of the Paspahegh tribe? Is that worth knowing? I think it is. And then Thomas Jefferson had the audacity to say that the Crown had incited the savages along the frontier into warfare, and their method of warfare included killing women and children. That template was set in 1610 by the colonists who invaded our land. So we really need to deconstruct that myth that exists around these so-called founding fathers. You know, when Patrick Henry says, "Give me liberty or give me death," for Black and brown people, it's "give me death," because liberty wasn't part of the calculus. But if you read that Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Folks, Thomas Jefferson didn't give it to me, and I wasn't in his calculus, but the Creator did. He's the one that tells me that we're all created equal. So folks, we have to grab it, we have to run with it, and we have to make sure our story is told. Thank you.
Sure. I just would like to say hurrah to what you just, hoorah to what you just said.
We can take it.
Man, I don't know where to begin with this, because it's 5 minutes.
I'll shut up.
Well, actually, the next question should be yours.
Okay.
Can you describe the challenges our tribes face to maintaining cultural practices and traditions, especially in the face of laws that sought to erase Native identity?
And that's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. Integration wasn't the panacea for Black and brown people that folks envisioned, because those two respective people groups lost a lot of their identity. There's a spirituality that exists among people of color that is not that evident in the dominant culture. I can walk down the street and I can see Chief Richardson, and I don't have to say anything, but we recognize each other because of who we are. So our people lost a lot of their culture during that another attempt at assimilation. We went to school. I didn't, but my kids did, and Carrie did, and others, and to harassment from people say, "There are those so-called Indians," and they'd make these little whooping sounds trying to sound like a warrior. And we were also called the Charles City Indians. I don't know Charles City Indian, I know Chickahominy Indian, but I learned recently that the area around our tribal center was referred to as Chickahominy Town. And I never heard that. That was in the community, and a lot of community members knew it. Kerry, had you heard that term?
No, sir.
So that was Chickahominy Town. So we were getting recognition, albeit not the positive ones that we wanted. But if you look at Walter Ashby Plecker, he recorded the names of people who were tribal citizens. And the very documents that he put together helped us in the administrative process. Those numbers, and I said, if he knew it, he'd be rolling over in his grave. And I wish he could have been reincarnated Sid. But the very tools that he used, yeah, but the very tools that he used to deny our existence came back and accrued to our benefit. And likewise, it did for our legislative process. And I would offer to those state recognized tribes who are trying to gain federal recognition, the exercise you go through in the administrative process does in fact teach you a lot, and it gives you the resilience you need to buffer those attacks that you will receive in that process. I don't know how many calls I got and threats and names that we were called during this process. But what happened? It caused our people to galvanize. Things that should have separated us pulled us together. And the final thing I'll add is we started a Title IV Indian education program, and that allowed us to take kids to Indian school on Friday nights and Saturdays. And some folks from other tribes came to that school with us. And we were up for the grant was open for renewal. And my wife got a call from the state saying, or from the deputy superintendent of public instruction in Charles City County, asking were we federally recognized or state recognized. She said, well, we're state recognized. Well, he called the governor's office and he said there are no state recognized tribes in Virginia. So we began a process, and Ann's tribe, the Upper Mattaponi, Chickahominy, and Eastern Chickahominy began a recognition process, state recognition process that took 4 years. And we met with groups from the Senate. It was a Senate joint resolution, the House and Senate. And we met with the House and the Senate on many occasions, testifying as to who we were. And we had some academics in that mix who helped us along. But some of the questions were so humiliating to me, I wanted to just throw in the towel and go away. But my heart says, you're not going to do it. You can stay the course. And in 1983, those 4 tribes gained state recognition through a very rigorous process, Chief Ann, that closely approximated those 7 criteria that we faced through administrative recognition. But those things further galvanized us as tribes. We have been visiting each other, these tribes, the 7 tribes I know, since way before 1900. We'd have fish fries, which were tantamount to powwows. We'd go to our respective churches for homecoming. I mean, if you got a Baptist and you have a church service and no potatoes and chicken, you're in the wrong place. But we did. But we would meet on a regular basis. And that relationship has just grown, and the ties have even intensified more and more. So when I look for the good things out of this, even though we faced a lot of hardships, the ties with these 7 tribes have never been stronger. And that's a direct outgrowth from the relationship that was kindled in those times of adversity when we mistakenly thought we had to prove who we were. We knew it, and our actions caused the elected officials to know it too.
And Chief, that's been going on since before 1676.
That's right. That's right.
Hold on, I'm getting text messages from another speaker.
Tell him to yield his position.
I'll just make one last, is it not working? Is it working? Okay.
Yes.
Just to kind of piggyback on some of the previous comments around, back to the education perspective. I just want to bring home, and I know I'm preaching to the choir to a lot of folks in this room, but being able to tell our stories and our histories and represent our cultures from our perspectives is a matter of tribal sovereignty. I need folks to understand that who are not Indigenous. Because if you are in a position where you're wanting to, or you're being asked, right, to talk about Indigenous history in the state of Virginia, you need to go to the right people, okay? Because we have the right, thank you. Our communities and our leaders have the right to choose who is going to represent our communities, and how that history, right, how that cultural expression is going to be presented to a wider public. And that, I think, is a big issue that I'm also seeing in Virginia. There's a complete lack of understanding of the proper way to engage with Indigenous communities, and that telling our stories, presenting our histories, sharing our culture is a matter of sovereignty, right? And that there are impacts, negative impacts, when we are not able to have control of how that telling is being, how that telling is being told, how the stories are being told. And so I just want to bring that home, right? It's very specific, but I totally believe that it's a part of this negative legacy, right, that we have had to grapple with for the last 400 years. To switch gears a little bit, I want to go back to some of the words that Chief Ann had shared about your healing journey with your community. I want to thank you for sharing that, because I know all of our communities are dealing with that. And I'll just go and be frank. Sorry, Pamunkey, we have a long way to go.
Yes, yes.
And I've gained inspiration from what you've shared. And I would really like to see us, not that we aren't working together, but I want to see us come together to talk more about these issues in a intertribal setting. So thank you both. Thank you, VTEC, for putting this together. This needed to happen.
Thank you, Ashley. I just would like to say, when you were talking about that, and I deal with a lot of non-Native academics. And in the past, we've had academics that didn't really give too much credence to what the tribes said.
Yes, yes.
They were like little stories, but we didn't really have the education in that department that they thought we should have in order to be able to make those statements truthfully. I'm so proud of Ashley that she has those credentials.
Yay.
As a tribal person. But I've had to fight academics over the years to get the truth out. And I would just really like to give a shout out to Dr. Edward Reagan, who has been tribal historian for us for 26 years. And he's lived among us and understands the dynamics of our community. And Dr. Julie King, who is an archaeologist at St. Mary's College in Maryland, who has done most of the academic work along archaeology. They work together hand in hand, and it's the recapturing of those stories and the evidence along with that is going to change the way academics see and hear from the tribes the stories that they have to validate as truth, because they've not done that before. And we work really hard on the forefront of archaeology and history to ensure that these academics understand that when Ashley Spivey, before she got her degrees, was just as valid as she is after she has her degrees.
Amen.
And what the story is coming from our communities. And so I just wanted to add that as we are educating you. And it's very sad that the state of Virginia Department of Education, I remember Marvin Bradby from Eastern Chickahominy, who's not with us today, he's an elder from Eastern Chick, worked with the Department of Education years ago, probably 25, 30 years ago, to try to get them to change the way that they were perceiving tribal history in the textbooks, to no avail. And that is a battle that we are still facing and still fighting in the state of Virginia. So those colonial mindsets that I was talking about, those constructs are still present in our agencies and in our government and in different agencies and environments around the state of Virginia. And it is incumbent upon this new generation of people to carry forth the work, as Chief Atkins said earlier, of our ancestors, to make that change in the face of Virginia, in their faces, in the legislature, in their agencies, in their government, in their social constructs, because that is truth. And we will continue to fight for the truth for our people.
Carrie, yeah, what, am I on? Can you hear me? Okay, one final statement. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Community colleges have reached out to embrace us. Institutions of higher learning beyond that, the colleges and universities have begun opening doors and providing pathways for us. Some have hired staff to be liaison with the tribes. It's very beneficial if a college is contemplating that to grab a liaison who has walked the walk, who's lived the life that we're living. And a final shout out to places like the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, Virginia Humanities, Jamestown Yorktown Foundation, Colonial Williamsburg, and I could add and add and add to the list. But these people are filling in the gap. They're doing what the Department of Education seems powerless to do. But they are telling our story, and they're providing educational settings where people can come and attend seminars and have some very in-depth discussions about who we are. So I couldn't leave without that shout out. The final thing, we love our ancestors. We love the elders. The night Uncle Graham Adkins died, I was a 15-year-old kid, and I'd walk down to his house to sit with him. I was there when he drew his last breath. That's how much I loved him. And I walked from there home that night with just a heavy burden because he was gone. But when I got home, I reflected on what he was, and I heard him say as clear as day, Stephen, carry it on, carry the fight. Don't lament my passing. Look at what I stood for, and pick up that mantle and run with it. So I'm challenging you, if your ancestors had those dreams, help fulfill that dream. I believe somewhere in this universe, in this time and space, they are aware of what we're doing. Thank you.
And I'd like to thank you, panel. I think this has been a great discussion. All of you continue doing what you're doing. Steve, I'm so used to saying Steve, it's not Steve, Chief Steve. But him and Chief Ann both know how much I think of them. They have done phenomenal work. Actually, extremely proud of you. I love seeing our people getting the education and continuing the fight, and we're going to continue to fight. Did Reggie or Raven? Okay, Reggie's up there. All right. Well, they said one person that could sneak up on an Indian is another Indian. So.
I'm so slender. I was standing sideways. How good was that panel?
Really good. Thank you.